If you want to study jazz blues and learn how to play solos that mix bebop lines with blues phrasing, then probably one of the best places to go check out some material is Charlie Parker. In this video I'm going to go over 5 examples from his solos, and I think they're great examples of how you can mix bebop lines and blues licks to some really amazing jazz blues. My name is Jens Larsen. If you want to learn more about jazz guitar, then subscribe to my channel. If you want to make sure not to miss anything, then click the little bell notification icon next to the subscribe button. This first example is probably one of the most famous Charlie Parker lines that there is. He used this as an opening phrase for 2, maybe 3 F blues solos that I know of. The idea is quite simple. The first part of it is sort of the blues part, and then it transitions into more of a bebop line. He starts with a line that's just coming out of a second inversion F major triad. Of course it's a blues in F. And the first part is just from the 5th up to the root. And then he's approaching first the 3rd with 2 chromatic leading notes from below, and then the same for the 5th, so 2 notes below, and then here we have the target note of that phrase. Then he adds more of a bebop phrase with this trill. But you could also see that the last part of this would be maybe F major pentatonic. He uses really a lot of major pentatonic in these examples actually. So, and then from there he goes into this series of dotted quarter notes just playing the root. A thing that's worth noticing about this first example is also that this is the first 4 bars of the first chorus, and he's never playing a flat 7. So it is sort of something that we kind of hear it as being a blues in F, and we expect to hear that F7 sound. But actually Parker is really deliberate about when he's introducing and when he's using that flat 7. And you'll see that also in the later examples. He's really only introducing that when he wants to go to the 4th degree, and then he kind of just keeps it more to the major pentatonic sound before that. This next phrase is really much more of a blues phrase than it is a bebop phrase. And you can tell by the note choice, but you can also tell by the fact that he's phrasing it a lot more freely. It's not really an 8-note line, it's just played and smeared out on top of the groove, which is also what's really giving it character, and which is also of course a nice change. If you play a lot of 8-note lines, or in this case also a lot of 16th-note lines, this is a nice change of pace. The line is really just the same motif repeated 4 times and developed along the way. And there are quite a few things happening that are very typical for Parker here. The main motif is this melody. That's of course just really a major pentatonic line with a leading note to the 3rd, so, and F major triad with the 6, all major pentatonic. Then he develops this, and he also uses that development to really nail the changes, because we have F7 in bar 1 and then B flat 7 in bar 2. And in bar 2 he starts the motif again, but he ends on the A flat here, and that's something that he does quite often, and that's also a nice way to create melodies, to play an F major phrase in bar 1, and then in the 2nd bar you can pretty much play the same phrase or something that's a development of that phrase, but you need to change the major 3rd into a minor 3rd, so you're kind of going from F major to F minor, which is of course the first time we have this sound, and then we get the A flat, so we get the same phrase in minor, and in that way we're connecting the 2 phrases and using just this major to minor shift to create the line. Then he returns to the original one and develops that a bit more. And then in bar 4 we get sort of a conclusion to the whole thing, and he introduces the E flat, so the flat 7. And as I mentioned in the previous example, he's really deliberate about when he's using this, and he's very often using it sort of in bar 3 or 4 as a signal that now we're going to go to B flat 7, and then in the first few bars he'll kind of leave it alone. The third example is also using this riff structure, where you have one main motif that's 1 bar long, and then that's repeated and developed throughout the first 4 bars of the chorus. So this first one is really just a basic F major line, again coming out of the second inversion F major triad, and really just a scale, but then without the seventh again. Probably this is also, it could be like a blues thing, or you can also consider it like a swing thing, that the major 7 is not really emphasized that much. He has other places in the form where he actually really goes for that major 7 on the F, where we would normally play an F7. So in that way, Parker also has some places where he's pretty much playing like a tonal progression on the blues rather than just playing an F7. But that's for another video, I think. So in this case, that's the main motif. Then he develops that, so on the B flat 7, in the same way as in the previous example, by changing the A to an A flat. So we just get a trill here, but it's still, and that actually becomes like a B flat 7 arpeggio, but really the idea here is just it's the same melody and we're changing that one note. Then back to the original motif. And then we get more of a blues phrase with a trill on the G and the A flat. Again, bar 4, the E flat is coming along, so he's now really emphasizing that it's an F7 and we're going to B flat 7. And then he's moving the motif and playing it from B flat, and he's actually starting already in the F7 bar, so. And then adding this sort of conclusion to that phrase by changing the motif and then ending on the B flat. The reason that I can keep on publishing videos every week is that there is a community of people over on Patreon that are supporting the channel. I'm very grateful for their support, and it's because of them that I can keep on making all these jazz guitar and music theory videos. If you want to help me keep making videos, then check out my Patreon page, and if you join us over on Patreon, I can also give you something in return for your support. The first 3 examples were more like longer examples illustrating how he would take small phrases and then use them and develop them through a solo, and in that way creating a larger context. I think it's also nice to have these last 2 examples that are a little bit shorter, but then they're also really demonstrating how you can start with a blues phrase and then end in a bebop phrase. And that's what this one does exactly, because we first get this, which is really just some chromaticism, but really just a really straight ahead blues phrase, and then immediately going into a trill, and then down an F7 arpeggio. And that way, since this E flat, you can hear again, he's really ending on that E flat, so he's really throwing that in there and going, now this is a dominant chord, and that's also because this is again placed right before we go to B flat. One of the first jazz artists that I started to listen to was Charlie Parker. In fact, there were 2 artists that were really influential in the beginning for me, because that was Charlie Parker and John Scofield. And they were actually important, and I understood what they were doing because of one thing. They were both really influenced by blues. When I was listening to that, in that period I was listening to a lot of blues. I was checking out a lot of B.B. King, Muddy Waters and Howling Wolf and Stevie Ray Vaughan. Then I was listening to this jazz where in both Scofield and in Parker you can hear a very clear understanding of how to play blues. And that of course was something that I immediately understood. And then there were some other bits that I didn't get, but I found those kind of intriguing, and that was really how I started checking out jazz. Here he also starts with a short blues phrase and then quickly turns that into a bebop line. This is on the B flat 7 going back to F7, and we first just get this leading note up to the 5th, so he's really not playing B flat 7, he's just playing a phrase in F really. And just sliding up to the C and then up to the high F. And then down to a trill. And in that way just concluding the same phrase by starting with a blues phrase and then ending in a pretty major bebop phrase. If you want to check out another video where I'm analyzing how Charlie Parker improvises and how he's using different devices, then maybe check out this video where I'm going over different ways that he is using arpeggios in his lines, because that's a very important part of how he plays, and it's also really useful to give you some new ideas. If you want to learn more about jazz guitar and this is the first time you see one of my videos, then subscribe to my channel. If you want to help me keep making videos, then check out my Patreon page. That's about it for this time. Thank you for watching, and until next time.